Hello, members. Tom Morrison here from Nashville, Tennessee, your home office. I'm excited to be talking about technical specifications today, which I know y'all are because they impact your business so much. I can remember we did a survey last year on technical specs, and 70% of the members said that it was a huge impact on their business. So that's why we got this team together called the Technical Standards Committee, and they really are watching the things on audit compliance for you. And today we're going to talk about CQI9, ASTM. We just literally returned from the AMEC meeting just a couple of days ago, and the Nadcap meeting that was just recently held in October. So lots of activity, lots of cool stuff going on, but lots of things that you need to be aware of. So we're going to start out though. We're going to start out with our technical, one of our technical chairs, Bob Ferry, who's been very active for years in the world of CQI9 for the automotive industry. So Bob, take it away and tell us what's happening in the automotive world.
Well, okay. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being on the committee and all your support and all the help that you provide. So with that, I'll just jump right into CQI9. Basically, we're still going through the revision, but we're making good progress. We went through finish up the definitions because we had new terms that we wanted to throw into the definitions. So it's kind of expanding the document a little bit, but hopefully it's going to help with the clarity of what they're talking about in that document. So they're trying to define all the terms for everyone because it's a worldwide spec. So, some of the highlights that came out of the meeting this past, it was on the 21st. Basically, one of the things that's going on is Ford was looking at having an action item list added to the CQI9 document. And the reason for that is they want to make sure that it is any non-conformances or not satisfactory findings on the document are going to be addressed through a systematic order, right? So that's why they go with the action item list. At the meeting before last, we convinced them that instead of having that be right on the document, adding columns, we convinced them to make it a separate Excel spreadsheet that we felt that would be a better way to handle that action item list. So they're putting the action item list on a separate Excel spreadsheet that's going to be part of the CQI9 document, that the assessment that we have to fill out. And the other thing that they're working on now is to have it automatically populate based on a non-satisfactory finding in the assessment. So whether that be on a process table or whether it be on the assessment itself, if you put not satisfactory, it would automatically throw that clause into the action item list and then provide a date and how you're going to fill this thing out. So it's going to automatically update. So they're working on that now, but they haven't finalized that at this time. The other thing that they talked about was there was a problem with spring manufacturers and stress relieving of parts. And I don't know if we have any spring manufacturers in here, but the spring manufacturers, because that was all they did, what they thought that they weren't, they didn't need to follow the CQI9. And all the OEMs just chimed right up and said that no. If you're doing any thermal processing to an automotive component, it's got to follow the CQI9 document. So that took the question out of that. Talked to the Ford representative, also said that the biggest deviation she gets asked for is for typically the inspection requirements for induction hardening processes. And that would typically be for large parts like camshafts or crankshafts. She gets requests to do something or to extend the the sampling requirements of CQI9 for that process in those situations. And it's only because the parts are so expensive, and having to cut a part that frequently is frowned upon by the manufacturer. So she says that she will take a look at she will look at that, and she'll ease up on the requirements of CQI9. And I thought it was important to mention that here because she also encouraged anybody that looks, that wants to deviate from some of the requirements that are in the CQI9. She encourages them, if it's a Ford or a part, she encourages people to contact Ford, the SQEs, so that they can assess what they're looking for, and many times they'll be able to come up with a resolution while still looking at what the risk would be for doing what the supplier is looking to do. So, but it's good to hear that they're open to talking with the suppliers. Don't think that you can't just reach out and get to ask them questions, because they look forward to being able to help in that situation, rather than have you go off on your own and do something and then them find out about it later on, and now they've got this huge liability out there in the field. So just encourage you to contact them. So I talked about the glossary. We finished going through that glossary. The last thing remaining, though, is we've got to compare it with the old glossary to make sure that we didn't miss any of the terms. I think we pointed out a couple that kind of get dropped off, and we wanted to get them back in. So that's going to be worked on here before this next meeting. So another question they had was about people that are doing FNC with hydrogen sensors. They were just wondering what they can do. They're going to contact specific people that are using these sensors to see what their suppliers and manufacturers, to determine the recommended verification methods for the hydrogen sensors being accurate. So the rep from General Motors was going to reach out to a couple of people and see what he could find out. If anybody has any thoughts on that, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to throw it up to the committee members. So the other issue that Ford had with the induction process table D, which is induction hardening, is that she's going to put together some wording that says, if there is a machine fault during the processing, that the parts that are being processed need to be immediately rejected. So she's going to put some wording together on that, and she's going to let us know, bring it to the committee, and then we'll be able to see what she has in mind. But basically, a lot of the induction processes are high-speed induction, and she just wants to make sure that if there is a machine fault, that those parts get immediately rejected so that they don't get into the supply chain. And those were the highlights from the last meeting.
Awesome, Bob. Appreciate that. So the next thing we're going to dive into Stephen Keckler from ThermTech, talking about something that impacts every heat treater, and that's ASTM and the hardness testing stuff. So take it away, Stephen.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. So quite a burn list of objects to get through. I apologize, as the letters and numbers will start bleeding together quickly. Starting out with hardness testing, that's where most of the big ticket work is going on just right at the moment. E18 had a ballot that passed to update the language in section 5.5.3. That's all covering basically how you support a convex test specimen. So picture a cylinder effectively. Um, that did pass ballot, like I said. You're not going to see that revision very soon, though, because that is being held while waiting for more substantive revisions to catch up and get done. That way, we're not pushing out a fairly minimal update to the spec. That being said, even once that does hit publication, there's probably going to be a new ballot item fairly quickly coming up after that to do more work to mostly the note, making it more explanatory. In general, this is a pretty good change. Not that anyone's really, for the most part, ever been hung for it, but technically speaking, right now, there's a really limited number of ways you can validly support a convex specimen. E92 has like 4 separate ballot items going through right now that are all kind of getting towards the finish line at the same time. A couple of those have to do with correcting some figures and some tabular data that really shouldn't be impacting anyone. They're just incorrect in the spec, so those are getting updated. Um, there is a somewhat significant ballot item regarding. So the ballot item itself is actually to help show how to perform the calculation, figure out your diagonal halves. And that in and of itself should be fairly non-controversial, but during the process of balloting that, it has really brought to light a conversation that, like, expressly speaking, every single indent is supposed to be getting checked to make sure it's a valid indent. And if that sounds crazy to you, that's because it kind of is. Um, the current ballot items right now are really not doing anything that would change that requirement. So just be aware it exists and be ready to defend yourself if your auditor starts asking questions about how you know you have valid indents. Um, Once this does clear ballot, which I expect it will, there is going to be more activity going on to review what can or should be done about that section to make it a little more realistic to how people actually interact with this spec. So more to come on that. I would expect probably a late 26, early 27 revision to E92. Um, E140 just had a ballot finish, working on updating its reporting section with language similar to what was in E92. It really effectively is not changing anything as far as the requirements of the spec goes, but it is making it much more clear what the expectation should be. That did have a persuasive negative that's going to go back to ballot. I would guess early to mid 26 is when that revision will be ready. And that may or may not go to publication right away, depending on how fast things go with my next item, which is there is a new conversion table for duplex stainless steels that will be working its way through the system for integration into E140. This is a product of work that was largely being driven by API as something of a joint venture between API and ASTM. That conversion table is first going to get into A370, and then once it's published there, we're going to have an opportunity to have it published in E140 as well. That doesn't have a super clear timetable, so maybe late 26. I would guess more likely we're looking at 27, though, for that. Um, there is a brand new spec in ASTM in case you're just looking for a new tool to use. It is ASTM E3499. It is the test method for indentation plastometry of metallic materials. That sounds like a mouthful. It is. And essentially what this is a modeling tool that uses effectively a Bernal impression. It's not a Bernal impression, but it looks like one. You scan it very carefully for its tomography, and then it runs through modeling software and it predicts a suite of mechanical properties. I'm not going to pretend to understand it particularly well. For people in the industry that are looking at it, I think this is going to be very cool for you, and for everybody else, it doesn't really matter. E110, the Rockwell precision and bias study test samples are still working their way around. They are looking for more test labs. So if that's something you'd be interested in doing, please, you could reach out to me and I can help get you in contact with the gentleman who's running it. Um, Otherwise, that's kind of progressing forward. There's a fairly hefty revision that actually I'm working on for the spec right now. That's going to go through at least one more, and I suspect a couple more ballots before it would be ready for publication. I would not expect to see a new revision to E110 sooner than mid to late next year, and I would not be surprised even then if it did not publish. Um, I don't have much to say on it, but E3246 is gearing up to have a round robin performed. That might roll out in 2026. If that's a spec you use, keep your eyes open for that. Otherwise, it's under general review right now, but there's not been any formal action. I'm just going to quickly rattle off some ISO specs that are under review. If you work to them, it's good to be aware that these are being worked on, but you have a 1685-9 that is LEEB, 4545 Noop, 6507 Vickers, and 6505 Brunel. So just be aware those are all under review currently. I have no idea what the timetable is for those. Some general stuff coming out of the Mechanical Test Committee. There was a ton of discussion around having portables be a part of E10 and E18. There are a number of users and some other ASTM committees that are quite upset about their inclusion and have been for quite a long time. I know probably everyone here has heard this quite a few times. The reason I bring it up, though, is there is a new round of fairly serious sounding conversation about people trying to pull together a study to validate the reality of some of these things. Right, wrong, or indifferent, pretty much all of the decisions that have been made up to this point have been done using speculation and not empirical data. And effectively, everybody's hit a wall on what, if anything, is going to get done without having some empirical data to back up decision making. So there will be more to come on that as we go down the road. There is some talk about transferring a number of specs from the steel committees to the mechanical testing committees. Of note, two of those would be, or several of those would be Teller-Brunner, Lee, which is ASTM A956, and UT for hardness. Sorry, I don't remember the spec number offhand. If those were to all be transferred over the mechanical test committee, probably the most substantive thing to come out of that would be they would all go to ballot to become effectively usable for non-steel products. So you could actually potentially begin certifying things like LEEB inspection for non-ferrous product, which is something currently you can't really do. At least not do it and say you're compliant to a spec. E23, that Sharpie impact testing, that is going to have a 2025 revision date on it. The most substantive thing coming out of that is that there will no longer be any imperial measurements referenced within the specification. It will be a truly SI unit only specification. It already functionally was, but they went through the work of cleaning up and removing all the remaining references. This is a really big picture thing, but there is a task group formed within ASTM to start investigating whether or not it is feasible, and if it is feasible, whether it would be advisable to allow other than a NIST produced verification standard for impact testing. As it currently stands, only if it is manufactured directly by NIST can you consider that a NIST traceable Sharpie impact test specimen. That is at times problematic for some test labs, so they are beginning the research into that. On the metallography front, E3 is going to have a 2025 reapproval without change. So you will see a notification hit your system if your system does automatic notifications. I'm just going to tell you now, there's no need to buy a new copy of it if you already have one. Literally nothing has changed. That being said, there is ongoing work to review the spec. So if you do see a revision come down the pipe in like 26 or 27, keep your eye out. That will be a substantive change. E384 has a half a dozen ballots that are going to be going, well, items that will be going to ballot. Pretty much all of them are just to mirror work that is being done in E92. In effect, what that will mean is E384 is going to become a slightly stricter spec if they all pass. Um, so I don't have a ton to say on that right now. Just be aware that that's working its way through the system. Um, This is just a friendly reminder for everybody because this was actually something of a significant conversation point in the E4 meetings. If you were doing grain size analysis using like a digital microscope, i.e., what most people in North America are using these days, E112 is probably not the actual spec you want to be working to. That spec is not meant for these kinds of devices, and it will lead you to all sorts of heartburn with establishing grain size. You probably want to be looking at using E1382. That's for automated grain size analysis. So if your company is using a digital scope and it's doing any amount of work assisting you with determining grain size, you may want to take a look at that. Last thing I hopefully promise is A370 has gotten its seemingly expected twice annual now revision. So there is a new rev for A370 out. I apologize to everyone who has to buy those twice a year. I don't agree, but they are hell-bent on validating it that way. I know that was a whole giant blurb. Are there any questions?
So, Stephen, anything that you see in all that that gives you kind of heartburn for the heat treater, or anything that you see coming down the pipe, or the general discussions?
I think the discussions right now in E18 regarding E18 and E10 regarding portables, I think are a really serious thing that we need to be looking at. I think there's a lot of opportunity for positive or negative changes depending on how that proceeds forward. Um, different parties are entitled to different opinions. I personally think it would be much cleaner if there weren't portables in E10 and E18. I think it would resolve a lot of problems. I also don't necessarily think there's a lot of willingness to go back to not having them in the spec. That being said, having them in there does cause some real reporting headaches and nightmares that are valid concerns. And in order to address that, it would functionally require people to put more work into their reporting systems. It would generate more opportunity to accidentally log an invalid result effectively, or a result other than as it should be. That's probably the most concerning thing being worked on like immediately, and that's a big picture thing that impacts about 5 different specs. And then I wouldn't consider it worrying, but probably the most positive thing coming down the pipe would be the handover of the hardness testing specs from the Steel Committee. That would be a very good change.
Okay. Any questions? Ed, you got any comments? I know you follow ASTM pretty closely.
No, he covered it pretty good, and I did sit in E20, which is temperature measurement, is still doing uh, virtual in addition to the live meetings, and I sat in on the thermocouples and thermocouple testing committee meetings, and it was very quiet over there. Things that probably are not hugely of concern to most heat treat operations, but they're still working specs and they're still trimming them here and there where they need to be revised and improved. So do look out for revisions to those temperature measurement specs that affect you. But there was nothing earth shattering in E20.
Well, I love when you say quiet in the room, because there's one place where it's never quiet in the room, and that's the AMEC committee, the aerospace specifications. So, with no questions, further questions for Stephen. Bob, let's go to you. You were there this week, and when you get done, I know, Stephen, you were there. You can give your perspective. I know Ed's obviously followed AMEC a lot. So, Bob, let's go to you to kind of get a sense of what happened at the AMEC committee meeting this past week. Oh, you're on mute, Bob.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good meeting. It was pretty lively where there was some good discussion going on and, different perspectives were brought to light. But, there's always been a couple of hot buttons, and one of them, we had certainly had some specs that are out for ballot right now that, when you bring them up during the committee and then you go through them as a committee so that you can bring resolution fairly quickly. So like AMS 2759 base spec, Sarah Lombardo, she's sponsoring that one. So she brought that to the committee and we went through some of the items that she had concerns on. I mean, I've just got some notes on here that I took for myself. I'm sure Stephen's got others, but we were talking about cleaning. So that's one of the requirements that is being driven by the subscribers to put into the AMS specs is about cleaning, making sure that your parts are clean before you put them in the furnace. And so we had a lively discussion on that. And for the 2759 base, we agreed on a generic definition for cleaning, for cleaning of type 2 parts, right? It's nothing that you need to have, because the issue is, well, what are you going to show for objective evidence of how clean the parts were going into the furnace, right? So I think we agreed on a generic definition. Now, Sarah's going to put that into words, and then we're going to be able to take another look at it hopefully down the road here. We also discussed having ASTM has recommendations and should statements in their specs, and we talked about how that impacts AMS and Nadcap, because Nadcap wants to make all of those as shalls instead of just recommendations and shoulds. And I know this has been talked about before, but again, we've got one prime that's really driving that, and I think that's that was an issue that we talked about, and they're going to get together and try to figure out exactly how they want to address this going forward. But we stated our concerns with having that kind of a requirement where everything is a shall. So we've got to see where that's going to wind up. They talked about the AMEC 21A spec, which is for titanium. Here, the big issue was they're going to put some references in there for load thermocouples to be used in titanium parts. And the reason is because titanium is, it just doesn't have good thermal conductivity. So in order to get good representation of what that temperature actually is in the part, you have to have a representative cross-sectional thickness titanium sample that is going to give you good information for what the temperature actually is on the parts. So they're going to put that into that specification as well. And then we had a good discussion about thermocouple wire roll calibrations and how that impacts, how that can impact your result when you're using wire rolls for thermocouple TUSs. And the reason is because the thermocouple manufacturer can take a roll of, say, 5,000 feet, and he can calibrate it at both ends of that roll, and then say, if he breaks that roll up into 1,000-foot rolls, he can just use the calibration he had for the 5,000-foot length. So they wanted to bring this to the forefront so that everybody knows that that can be a practice. It doesn't mean that everybody's doing it that way. And the one way, if you can circumvent that from happening to you, is to make sure that you put on your purchase order that you want the calibrations done on your roll, not just on a 5,000 foot length. And if you're buying 1,000 foot lengths, the only downside to that is they charge you money for doing a calibration. Okay, so you have to decide as a company which way you would want to go. And apparently there have been some instances where they calibrated a 5,000 foot roll, and somebody went and did a temperature uniformity survey and it didn't pass because of the thermocouple correction factors. And then they had the roll recalibrated itself and then redid the survey, and lo and behold, they were able to pass without doing anything to their furnace. So that was talked about a little bit. I mean, I may have had that happen to me where I questioned my thermocouples maybe once or twice in my career, but not often. But they just wanted to put that out there that, that could be a possibility based on how they calibrated their thermocouple wire. So the next thing we looked at was, let's see, looking at data from non-expendables. So they're still, for AMS 2750, they're still looking at doing some studies on non-expendable thermocouples and type K, just to see what their life actually is before they start drifting. Because right now there's some question as to whether the number of usages in the current AMS 2750 spec should be allowed. The primes are looking at it more towards they think that's too much allowance, so they want to have some data to justify what they want to do with the number of usages for non-expendable base metal thermocouples. That they did make a comment that said that based on the study or the analysis that they're doing, this probably isn't going to get into this next revision, but the revision after that, it probably will. Talked about bringing AMS. Before I get off the thermocouple, the 2750, the other thing that was brought up is AMS 2750 requires, or Nadcap, they require you to have a depiction of where your thermocouples are for your temperature uniformity surveys, as well as you have to include where your furnace control and your over temperature thermocouples are located in the furnace as well. So just wanted to bring that up, that was brought up almost from a Nadcap perspective. So if you are a Nadcap heat treater, you want to make sure that you have the depiction of where these thermocouples are located. Either take a picture, draw it out on on a sketch somehow, but you have to have something that you can show the auditors. The next thing I saw them talk about was AMS 2753, which is the salt bath nitrocarburizing spec. So that spec has been stabilized. However, they're looking at bringing that out of stabilization because there are still people using it. And they thought that maybe the best thing to do at this point was to create an AMS 2759/14 specification so that it would incorporate what's going on with salt bath nitrocarburizing. So they're going to use a lot of what 2753 had in it and build up a 2759/14 spec. That hasn't started yet, but it's in the works, so I don't expect to see that for a couple of years. And then we talked about the cleanliness and cleaning requirements. So that's about those were the main points that I got out of the AMEC meeting this time.
Okay, thanks. Bye. Stephen, being in the room, anything you got to offer?
I think I'd only add a couple things in is one of them, and this may be old news to a lot of people. This was new news to me, and it may be important in some of your purchasing decisions. They are putting a ton of work into removing all of the CGA gas references
Yeah.
from the specs and replacing it with all of the same composition, all of the same dew point requirements, but removing the CGA reference. So functionally, what you have to buy as far as quality goes hasn't changed, but some of your purchasing documents might need to be updated to reflect that. And then the only other thing I would state, and this is in reference to the ASTM shall concerns coming from some of the primes, is this just really highlights why it is important that you participate in standards organizations, both AMEC and in this case ASTM. You know, they have these very strong opinions on the subject. That's fine. That's their prerogative to do so. Also, they're not actively participating, so they can be as upset as they want to be, but if you don't participate in the system, you're not really going to get what you want.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, that's AMEC. I would encourage anybody watching this, if you could get your quality person involved with AMEC, it's great. They have had some tremendous influence with MTI on the specification stuff. And many people don't understand that what happens in AMEC plays itself out in NADCAP because that's the specs that they're auditing to. So you're getting to have an influence of making the rules that you're getting audited to. So great opportunity to serve and serve the industry. So now, speaking of NADCAP, let's go to Mr. Ed Engelhardt to give us an update on what's going on in NADCAP and all the latest things there. I know we just had our latest meeting in October in Pittsburgh, Ed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was unable to attend, so I don't know that I can bring a whole lot of light to it. Um, I see Johanna Lees is on. She's probably going to be in a lot better position to describe what went on there than I do because I was unable to go. But I do want to backtrack to a couple of AMEC things that were brought up. One is that the end-to-end wire calibration. I'm on the sub team for the AMS 2750, the next revision in line. I guess it's J. Uh, and we had a lot of discussion about this just last week, as a matter of fact. And it turns out that that paragraph is trying to serve two masters, both the party that manufactures the thermocouple and the party who buys the thermocouple that's assembly that's completed or the roll of wire that's completed. And I think you're going to see that broken out differently or arranged in such a way that it's clear whose responsibility lies where and how reporting has to go on certs when you buy thermocouples as regards end-to-end calibration difference. Then, yes, the non-expendable drift and usage issue is still coming down the line. Like I said, it was going to be really to establish life cycle and usage cycle parameters in 2750. And then the removal of the CGA specs, this started, I don't know, probably about a year, a little more ago when we had finished revising 2801. And all of a sudden, primes are calling up, going, "What are these CGA specs in here for?" And like, well, they've only been there in a long time. I don't know why today is the problem. And they're all going, "Oh, well, we can't buy gas to that and all that." And I'm thinking, seriously, I mean, titanium parts heat treaters buy gas to this all the time, and heat treat parts in these gases all the time. And it's not like in the 60s where buying bad gas was a real possibility because back then it was all compressed and the opportunity for contamination was very high. Virtually everything now comes from a cryogenic source. The gas we buy now is like literally orders of magnitude better than it was 30 years ago. But nope. And then someone else complained, "Oh, now I have to go find out when CGA updates their specs." Well, that's always been the case with reference specs. I mean, I've paid to do that for 30 years. I don't know why it's a problem for a prime, but apparently it is. So that's where the dropping of the CGA spec reference is coming from. And yes, when I went and studied this, even the old mill specs that, mill B, what was it, HH86 for hydrogen, and way back when they were mill standards and mill commodity specs, they all ended up at CGA way back in the 50s and 60s. So I don't know why it became such a problem recently, but it sure did. And so we're having to retool these specs to take those words out of there because it upset somebody. They had to actually subscribe to a notification service, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's those items. And there were a lot of ballots closed since the last meeting. So you had hydrogen embrittlement, which I think got approved. 2750/2 for hipping. I don't think there's too many hipping shops out here, but they had 4 disapprovals, so they're going to have to grind through that to another ballot. Bob mentioned the 81200 replacement spec. That had 2 disapprovals, so that's going to have to, crawl through the resolution process and maybe a reballot there. Gordon just sponsored 2759/3, which was the pH stainless, and that sailed through pretty cleanly. Sarah's doing yeoman's work on 2759 base spec. It's had 7 disapprovals, and wow, that's a monumental job. Kudos to Sarah for taking it up. /8 ion nitriding was approved, and I'm sponsoring 2769 for vacuum heat treat. That closes on December 1st. If you have comments, hop online, take a look at what we have laid out in front of you. Send us your comments so we can have a good, strong document at the end of the day. But I will have to defer to Johanna Lisa for the NADCAP stuff. Sorry.
There's just one other PSA I want to shove in real quick regarding the thermocouple calibrations. There was a lot of discussion on this, and I think it's worth pointing out there in case this isn't something you deal with very often. Like any given subset length of wire, so you buy 100 feet, you're using 1 foot. Any subset length from the length that is calibrated has the opportunity to be potentially significantly different. So the reason why I bring this up, right, is there was a lot of conversation about, well, do we need to have every length that is sold calibrated? Is that fine? Is that not fine? And the short answer is it's kind of moot, because ultimately, unless you're buying like a finished, ready to use thermocouple, if you do any sort of modification to it, like your original calibration may or may not be completely accurate.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that certainly when you're dealing with 5,000 feet, and testing each end, it's a lot different than when you're taking 20 feet off of that 5,000 foot roll and then you're using that for thermocouple wire, right? I get it. It's concerning, but the issue became that they wanted to put something into the document that required the thermocouple manufacturers to tell you what length of wire that they calibrated it from, right?
Yeah.
And the issue becomes then, obviously, because you're a supplier, you're responsible for your suppliers, and now that's going to be an audit trap, a NADCAP audit trap for anybody that's buying thermocouple wire, that their thermocouple provider had to put on their certification what length of wire that they certified this from. And we just saw it as an audit trap. And quite honestly, I didn't see the need unless you have an issue. And then the first thing you're going to do is you're going to call your thermocouple supplier and say, hey, what went on with this thing?
Yeah. I think ultimately where that conversation finished is I think that's going to go back and they're going to look at putting in something of like an explanatory note to act as a PSA, sort of in line with the conversation we just had. So should not become a reporting requirement. As much as they hate shoulds and AMEC, this is effectively going to become a should.
Yeah.
We need more maize. Awesome. Well, any other questions on NADCAP from your end, Ed? That's a pretty good report for someone that didn't have much to report on, wasn't there?
Yeah, didn't have much to do with NADCAP. Had a lot more to do with AMEC. So,
right.
Yeah, wish I could have been there, but.
So let's go over to Joanna. Joanna, I know you typically have a lot to talk about on the management council. So is there anything you got on the task force or anything to share?
Well, unfortunately, because of my duties at NMC, I'm not always able to attend all of the heat treat task group meetings. And so I end up relying on the minutes just like everybody else does. And the report, of course, from my colleague Ken Nelson, our quality manager at Continental Heat Treating. But I did attend several sessions or several sections of the agenda for heat treat, and I can give some updates on those. I'll start with the STSTG, which was very well attended. I'm thinking is based on my memory of all the chairs that were filled, we probably had between 50 and 60 attendees, including a good handful of primes. There are some suppliers who aren't happy that the primes are in the room. I have the opposite opinion, that being that I think it's important that they hear from not just those of us who are vocal during heat treat task group meetings, but from people who feel a little more comfortable during STSDG to speak up and express their concerns and opinions. So I was very pleased. We had Airbus in there, GE, of course, Jeff Koss, our heat treat task group chair, and several others. Oh, Latch was there. So I was very pleased with the attendance. There were quite a few new attendees. So I was very pleased with that, and I encourage everyone to please attend the meeting. It's always held on the first day at 4:30 in the afternoon. So I understand the travel restrictions that may exist, but I really think it's an important participatory activity for all of the heat treat suppliers. Okay, so I'm just going to go very quickly through here the notes I have for the task group. We reviewed the rail, which is extensive and a task which took quite a long time. The reason for that is we're attempting to identify those tasks that have been completed and haven't seemed to have been updated, excuse me. Also, to try and streamline the process, there are entries that are made between the meetings that represent completion of some of those tasks. And so it's just a recap. So this one was particularly long, but productive. We also reviewed OP 1114 HT appendix. That also took quite some time because there were quite a few comments on that. And again, I encourage everyone to read the minutes because that was primarily captured in the rail update, as well as discussions that occurred as a result of the very many comments on that. OP 1116, there's a sub-team of subscribers that's been formed. Let me just back up because I'm not capable of keeping all these things straight in my head. OP 1114 is task group operations. OP 1116 is auditor staffing. So there are some concerns among the subscribers about new auditors, so they have formed a sub-team to address that. Going quickly through the task group meeting agenda, AC 7102/5 Rev G update. The item was to discuss the path forward. And that is primarily waiting for OP 1120 and OP 1119 for NMC resolution because there are several sub-teams working on that. I, of course, am a member of those sub-teams to try and keep my finger on the pulse of that activity. So I can address that probably more in detail as we get to my NMC report. So why don't I go to that unless there are any questions in the meantime? Okay, I'll take silence as no questions. So, and I've done it again. OP 1119 is new task group formation, and OP 1120 is audit criteria agreements. Okay, so we'll start with item number 6 for globalization. Globalization Subcommittee has been rather active. They are proposing that a new policy be written, and specifically for application of AI in the Nadcap process, and that there will be 3 new definitions added to OP 1103, those definitions being generative AI, open AI, and closed AI. We also discussed the subscriber survey, sub-team, and again, subscriber, I'll emphasize that because this is specific to their concerns. There was a sub-team meeting on Wednesday. They expected 5 action items, but being a supplier, I was not able to attend, so I also will have to wait for the minutes. Globalization, replacing the CAAP, and metrics. As usual, there were quite a number of metrics values presented. Again, rather than going through all of these one by one, because it's an extensive list, I will direct everyone to the minutes. But some of the interesting things, cycle time is very good. On-time certification issuing is very good. Merit is at 92%. The requirement or the goal is greater than or equal to 80, so we're doing well on that. Equitable participation, as usual, is not as good as I believe it should be. We're at approval ballots, 72% participation on the part of the primes. 70%. Interviews are at 96%, and observation audits are woefully under addressed, as usual. Quality metric, quality index is also looking good. We go on to more metrics. Cycle time is green, merit achievement is red, auditor evaluation is green, equitable contribution as usual is red, stability as measured by Boeing's model, whereby suppliers are achieving the same or an improved accreditation length over 3 process audits completed. So what they're doing is they look back over, this is Boeing's methodology that NMC has adopted. They look at the last 3 audits and they evaluate whether suppliers are continuing to operate under the same merit or an improved merit, meaning have they retained their 18-month or their 24-month over 3 audit cycles. That is in its early stages, and they expect things to be a better metric than what we've used in the past. Let's see, customer satisfaction survey, that is an ongoing task. If you recall, that satisfaction survey was issued, I want to say, almost 3 years ago. And there are still items on there that have not yet been addressed. I will say that a good portion of those are EAN items. And the reason for that is the EAN project as it relates to all of the apps, supplier, subscriber, staff, auditor. Just to give you an example, the staff EAN status, or the staff app for EAN status is at 0% completion. Sub-team has been formed to address that, which includes analysis of how many tickets, how old the tickets are, what the percentage of completed tickets is. I am also on that sub-team. In parallel with that, there is a subscriber sub-team that is also analyzing that. I don't know about everyone else, but I continue to have issues when we're trying to either when I'm attempting to vote on NMC ballots or even when we're posting our self-audit, there continue to be issues. I encourage everyone, please use the ticketing question mark. I think it's at the bottom of the left bottom corner when you're on EAN, please, if you don't ticket it, it doesn't get addressed. So please be diligent about that. OP 1119 and OP 1120, those efforts are continuing. The sub-team continues to meet. We hope that we have finally reached a point where it is ready, we think, almost ready for ballot. So I will update you the next time on where we are on that. Let's see, audit effectiveness, heat treat. Okay, continuous improvement. One of the topics that was discussed was that the heat treat number of majors per day for reaccreds is down. So that's very encouraging. Initials they called bouncy, meaning it's cycling. But as far as recreds go, apparently we're doing a pretty good job. One of the concerns that I have in that regard is the better we do, the tighter the requirements become, meaning what the failure threshold becomes. So we have to keep an eye on that, because if we do too good of a job, we're going to end up having 0 majors that would require us to lose our merit. So that's just the pessimist in me speaking.
They haven't changed that, have they?
Not in the last, Ed helped me on this. I think it's the last 2 reviews of that.
I think more than that. As things were improving in the heat treat task group among the supplier performance for reaccreds, each time they calculated it, the number was going down, and even the subscribers are going, I don't think it's such a hot idea to just cut that every time we have a good number, because it's just not a realistic thing. So I think they've been wise to just let it sit until they really think there's some reason it needs to be cut. Like, maybe somebody comes down the line from the board and says, hey, how come you have improving performance and you haven't reset a goal? That's what happens in an AS audit, right? You set your on-time delivery for, better than 85%. And if you run at 95% all the time, they wonder, well, set it for 90. So, so that's actually a good problem to have in the task group.
Yeah, but is that their continuous improvement measure? Is that what that is?
Yes. But like I said, it's a good, to quote Monk, if any of you watch that program, it's a blessing and a curse. So good job, everyone, but keep the downside of it in mind. Okay, planning and ops. To refresh your memory, there was some concern, maybe a year ago or so, that because the planning and ops committee meeting was held at the end of basically the end of the week, that issues that had come up within the task groups they weren't given an opportunity to address some of those things until the next meeting because of the timing of planning and ops. So what they did was with planning and ops was they had one early in the week, and then the opening planning and ops committee meeting, and then another towards the end of the week, which resembled the previous format in that task groups were given the opportunity to bring issues that had come up within their task group meetings to bring it to planning and ops. So there are really 2 planning and ops committee meetings that occur. I think that's an improvement. So one of the presentations that was made during planning and ops was why you need FAI. There is a significant push, and I'm not quite certain where it's coming from, for FAI to increase the number of audits that it performs on an annual basis. My concern when the business case was submitted to NMC voting members a few years ago for establishing this task group, my concern was that it was PRI's attempt to broaden their scope, and that ultimately it would be their goal to have all suppliers of all sorts be required to get an accreditation to that task group, which I think is not necessarily a good thing. So now my concerns seem to have come to some fruition, at least. FAI is currently doing 18 audits per year. Their goal is to perform 100 audits per year. So there is a hardcore press going on right now to increase the number of FAI audits. So I'll just keep my eye on that. Let's see. There was a question brought up by the Heat Treat Task Group to Planning and Ops as to why VCAs, virtual corrective action audits, were included in the supplier cycle time data. It doesn't really cause that much concern for me personally, but there were other suppliers who felt that that was skewing our numbers. NMC is going to take a look at that, not just for heat treat, but for other task groups, and see if there is some kind of trend going on. I don't perceive that there is, but I only participate in a couple task groups. That's pretty much the planning and ops, but it just occurred to me that I missed something during the other NMC committees having to do with presentation that was made by a company by the name of IVIS. Give me just a moment, please. For those of you who are familiar with C3 Data, C3 Data has software that is available to heat treat suppliers that enables us to perform our self-audit using their software. And there is PRI has established a relationship with the company by the name of IVIS to do something comparable to what C3 Data is already offering. I asked some questions about that having to do with, there we go, I found it now. Thank you for being so patient. So this is a self-audit automation that they're proposing. Some of the questions that I asked at that point, being very aware of CMMC requirements, and also whether this testing that's being done on this beta version of the software, who's doing the testing, were those persons or those individuals performing the testing actual auditees? Because if it's PRI performing the testing, I'm not so certain that is representative of what an auditee actually has to go through. Was it cloud-based or on a local server? Their response was that it was cloud-based, and they are clear on their position that they want to keep CMMC requirements at arm's length, and that right out of the chute concerned me. One of the other questions I asked was, after an audit criteria has been revised, what is the time lag between when that new audit criteria will be appearing in their software? Because if it takes them 6 months to get that AC going, it's, in my mind, not a very good tool. They didn't have an answer for that question. And I asked the broader question, how is security being handled? And I really didn't get what I felt were great answers. But expect to see emails from PRI touting this new software, the availability of this new software. Part of the presentation included the gentleman from Mitchell Labs, who was, I guess, part of the beta testing team. And I was trying to get to him, speak to him personally and directly, but I wasn't unable to do so. So I think that's all I have for now, unless there are any questions. And as usual, I brought us over time.
So Joanna, so my question, so Nadcap has developed a platform that competes with other suppliers out there offering platforms to help people can do testing and audit compliance?
Well, it's for the self-audit. It's specifically designed for performing your self-audit.
Got it.
Is it related just to pyrometry or what?
It's across all task groups. It's not specific to heat treat.
Oh, okay.
Which is why I asked the question as to how long after an audit criteria has been revised is the new audit criteria available for suppliers to use for their self-audit. Because if that time lag is, I would say, more than a month. I don't know how that's an effective tool.
Yeah, I don't like all that cloud-based.
Sorry.
Right? So
We'll
yeah.
we'll definitely see how it works out over time.
Correct.
Sure. Well, anybody got Bob, Ed, Stephen? Any of y'all got anything else to add? Questions to the NADCAP meeting part of it?
Not on the Nadcap, no.
All right.
Good.
Anybody got any other comments to add on any of the other sections?
Yeah, AS 13,100 revision A is published.
Yes.
The
Mhm.
reference manual, which has the self audit for compliance checklist, has also been completed. So you can use that to do a gap analysis. I've been working my way through it for solar, and I've already found errors in it. I haven't sent anything in yet, but there are errors in it. The due date for compliance was originally January 1st, and I see GE has that as a requirement. But in the last monthly virtual meeting, it was decided that March, the end of March, April 1st would be the new compliance date. Now, individual primes may not go with that, and so it remains to be seen if GE is going to alter their January 1st requirement on that. And that's really all I have.
Is that January 1st? I thought that was 2025, January
No,
1st.
no, 2026, January 1st, 2026 for Rev A.
All
They
right.
didn't publish it till I think last March or something.
Yeah,
And then they've been updating the reference manual since then. Now,
but they expected compliance, not for revision A, but for the base.
oh, that was like January 1st, 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, Johanna went to the Houston meeting, by the way. She might have something to add to this.
Jan, I saw your hand was raised. Do you have a question or comment?
I do. I just want to, of course, reemphasize, read the minutes, read the agenda, but as it relates to that, be aware that for NMC minutes, the presentations are embedded within the minutes. I noticed a while back that for heat, at least for heat treat, the presentations were not present within the minutes. I raised that as new business standardization a couple of meetings ago. Unfortunately, I was shot down. And so be aware that when you read the minutes for the task group, whatever task group that is, you have to search for the presentations elsewhere in EAN. So when you're reading the minutes, keep in mind you don't have a full picture because the presentations are elsewhere and you got to hunt those down. And off the top of my head, I don't remember where they reside. I did a search before this last meeting looking for those presentations, and none of the heat treat presentations were there. So I raised that issue during the heat treat task group meeting, and I got the look. So I will follow up on that once the minutes for this past meeting are posted to verify that the presentations related to the minutes are indeed there, but I'm going to have to bring that up to standardization NMC again, because that's, in my mind, the meat and potatoes of any task group meeting are in the presentations because that's where the real data is. And if you have to hunt them down or they're non-existent on EAN, what's the point? So there's that. As far as the meeting I attended in Houston in October, it was, I thought, A, very well done, B, informative, C, educational. It enabled me to make contact with the authors of not just the spec, but also the reference manuals, express my concern that a special processor does not, I believe a special processor does not have the same requirements as a manufacturer and that they may have missed the boat on that part. And for those of you who are able, should they have another one, which I'm understanding is scheduled for March or potentially scheduled for March, it is well worth the time, effort, and energy to attend.
Awesome, Jana. Thank you very much. So before we leave, I want to thank this group for all the work that y'all put into this. So the Technical Standards Committee was born in 2014 under Bob Hill from Solar Atmosphere's presidency, and Bob and Ed both took over the helm in 2015. So 10 years later, they've been at this for a decade leading, and they're stepping aside this year so that we're tapping into the next generation with Gordon Porterfield from Solar Atmospheres and Sarah Lombardo from Vacuum Braze. Both of them have been very active in AMEC and the Nadcap process for a long time. So we're getting picked. They're handing the ball off to two very capable people. So Bob and Ed, I'd like to say just a wholehearted thank you from the membership of MTI and the leadership. Y'all have done a tremendous job in the last 10 years to help move the needle in MTI's influence and giving the heat treater a voice in the process. So thank you very much for all y'all have done.
Yeah, you're welcome. Been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. It's, we kind of love this stuff, so it energizes us when we get together with all of the MTI members that have the same kind of passion that we do. So thank you for allowing us to do it.
Well, don't think you're running off. We're going to keep you engaged at some level. We need that knowledge and that effort. So thank you very much. Well, members, this is such a vital committee to help because this is such a big deal in your business. So stay tuned every quarter as we host these meetings. Thank you very much for your participation. Remember, if you have an opportunity to send your quality manager to an AMEC meeting or a NADCAP meeting, an ASTM meeting, please do. Please do. Feel free to reach out to myself if you'd like to start that process and figure out details on that. But remember, you're not just strong, you're MTI strong. Have a great week.